welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell.
Hey there, it's Rose here. Today's episode is the first in a series this month concerned with the naming of the intense emotion we are all experiencing now that the IPCC has unequivocally stated the dire consequences we face because of the climate crisis. So fittingly, today's question is, how do we talk about our collective grief? And to help us answer that question, my guest today is psychotherapist Patricia Fero, who has dedicated her life to igniting the collective feminine in planetary healing. In addition to a 30-year psychotherapy practice in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Pat is the author of Mining for Diamonds, How to Use Adversity to Create Resiliency, What Happens When Women Wake Up, Clearing of Our Internalized Patriarchy, Sacred Marching Orders, The New Energy of the Solar Feminine, The Other Side of the Door, a guidebook for connecting with loved ones who have crossed over, and the about to be released, What Happens When Women Convene. Pat is certified in cutting-edge grief treatment as an induced after-death communication facilitator. But her greatest gift, in my humble opinion, is that she epitomizes the skill of fierce listening, tapping into what is being said, and maybe more importantly, what is going unsaid. My conversations with Pat are open-ended and always intuitive, resulting in a richness that can only be described as what wants to happen. And I am beyond excited to share her wisdom with you today. So welcome, Pat.
Oh, Rose. Wow. I'm impressed.
Yeah. Don't you wish you knew you?
Exactly. She sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, she sounds pretty cool.
I think that what's most important, of course, is to listen internally within myself to see what wants to show up, what wants to be said. And the first thing that did show up as I listened to you talk about a little bit about fierce listening is one of the things that we can do for others who are experiencing climate grief is to create a container for them to be able to express what they're experiencing. I was walking with a friend who says to me, you know, I'm not so fond of people. It's the plants and the animals and the sky and the earth. That's where my love is. And she had just learned about something I live in a townhouse cooperative, happened in our cooperative that somebody came across a nest, really, of ground bees. Well, what they did, because this is what we do in our culture so much, they took these horrible toxins and they just sprayed them and annihilated them. And she was enraged. She was so angry. And she said, they were here first. They have a right to live. How dare they? And she raged for a while. Mm-hmm. And as I was listening to her rage, I thought, this is one thing I can do for her, is I can hold a container for her to express her rage. So that's the first thing that comes up for me. When we talked a week or so ago, you asked me if I have had clients bringing client grief into our sessions. And as it happens, that week I had two with very dramatic In therapy, we kind of call it issues, with very strong experiences of climate grief. And the first one was a young woman who is an environmental justice major from one of our universities. And once she graduated with her master's, she found an organization to go work for. And the organization she went to work for is in California. I don't remember exactly where. Mm-hmm. And very isolated.
She's isolated?
No, the community.
Okay.
The community is isolated. She had I speak with her on a Monday. After that weekend, she told me the story, true story, of the fires. They were evacuated because of fires. And then it looked like maybe it's going to quiet down. They could come back. What happened instead, because of certain conditions, heat and dryness, it flamed more. It grew, exploded, and became the second worst fire in California's history. Mm-hmm. In that process, her colleagues who lived in an adjoining small town, their entire town was burned down.
Wow.
And so she was sharing her experience with that story, and also that the kind of intellectual, non-emotional aspect of the organization didn't give any room for the emotional experience that everybody had. It was just back to work, mm-hmm. with no space for the grieving and the caring for. So that was one thing that happened that week that you called. Another thing that happened that week that you called is that I have a client who has it's a medical position that she has, and she was taking on a traveling position. So she was going out to, I think it was Idaho, for 9 months to work in a hospital out in Idaho. She drove out. I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan. She drove out, and as she drove out to Idaho, she drove through the fires and the smoke. So all her driving up there. I mean, not all of it, but so much of it. And somebody, I shared that with somebody, and that person said that had to have been soul wrenching.
I mean, as you're talking, I'm holding my heart space.
That's right. That's right.
The land, the animals. I mean, somebody, I saw a meme the other day that talked about just simple things like if you leave your grass grow long, then the temperature of the earth is like 19 degrees centigrade. But if you mow it short, it's like 25 degrees centigrade. If it's bare earth, it's like 45 degrees centigrade. I mean, I don't think about when I'm mowing my lawn about the little creepy crawlies that are living underneath there and what, and how we're affecting their lives. So it is in everything. It's in everything. And I've been having so many conversations, either online or people calling me, especially because of the podcast, just they're in a lot of grief. And it may not be as direct as what you're saying, but what struck me about your client, that's the environmentalist, and her company saying, well, just get back to work. I mean, that's kind of how we treat grieving in general in this country. And there is no real space for, your dad dies and 2 days later, you're expected to be back at your job. How do we process that?
Well, one of the ways that we process it is we have the time and space to do it. Because we live in a world of distractions, busyness, and doing. Mm-hmm. And all of those things distract us from who we are on the inside. Mm-hmm. So the grief that's there just gets pushed to the side or pushed down and never gets processed.
Yeah. And then like any other emotion, it squishes out in other ways. I mean, it becomes disease or stress or whatever. Yeah.
Totally. One of the things that I like to say is unexpressed emotions are like mushrooms. They grow in the dark. Mm-hmm. And we can see in our country, I mean, our country is the most extraordinary example of all this denial and Well, it is. I mean, distraction, busyness, individualism, ego, it's being acted out. It's being acted out so terribly with this split that's occurred around COVID. And so much around politics. All this unprocessed emotion is that's on fire, actually. Andrew Harvey, that I love so much, talks about this time that we're in like a shadow orgy. It's like everybody's stuff is coming to the surface, whether they like it or not. And it's either getting processed or it's getting acted out.
Yeah, I was thinking yesterday about the division, the divisiveness. I mean, I think that the last 4 years, even if you set the politics aside, the last 4 years have been very traumatic in terms of not just the left and the right, not just the mask and non-mask, vaccine and unvaccine, but the idea that we are so divided and the divisiveness is playing out in every scenario.
That's right.
To me, it feels like trauma.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as an empath, I mean, it feels like collective trauma. And that's where I'm getting phone calls and emails from people. They're saying like, I don't know if this is my emotion that I just can't seem to regulate my own nervous system or what this is, but people are just crying at, when they wouldn't be, or, waking up anxious when they wouldn't be. And they're like, I don't even know why I'm feeling this, but it's everywhere.
I would like to read something to you from this book by James Hollis. He's a Jungian psychotherapist. The book is titled Living Between Worlds, Finding Personal Resilience in Changing Times. And this sentence I've read over and over again. This is a quote from him. It goes, "Disorders of the brains of politicians who unwittingly let loose psychic epidemics on the world."
Wow.
We had that with Hitler. We've had that with some of the other dictators that through time. And I believe that this describes what happened with Trump as well. Why we see this. Disorders of the brains of politicians who unwittingly let loose psychic epidemics on the world.
Yeah. Well, it does seem like an epidemic of the heart. I mean, my heart aches on any given day at any given time. And I do all the, breathing and meditating and yoga and all that stuff, but it has to be a daily practice for self-care to get through these times right now. It seems.
And that's for you.
That's for me.
That's for you because you're doing it. But then on the other side, with this hatred and rage and the people that stormed the Capitol, and they're still stewing. They still have plenty of plans. And actually, another one of my clients told me she has a friend whose husband and family are in QAnon.
Okay.
And shared with her some of those websites and Facebook pages and stuff. What she found is that what is being told and believed is that Democrats are pedophiles who are drinking the blood of little children as they sodomize them.
Yeah, I've heard that about.
We heard it about Hillary. Now it's expanded to
all Democrats. Okay.
All Democrats are doing this. So how do you get any more hateful than that? I mean, in Hitler Germany, Jewish people, there was a belief they had horns and tails.
Right.
People believed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the psychic epidemic that is so frightening. We're not talking about climate change, but we're talking about emotional climate.
Well, and I feel that it's all interconnected.
Me too.
It's all interconnected. What we have done to the planet, we have raped her. We have extracted, we have degraded her. I know you and I have had conversation about this is how we treat women. This is how we treat Mother Earth. It's very similar. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's all interconnected. And it seems like it's at the crescendo right now. It's so loud. It's everywhere. And I do believe just because we can't see it, it's like electricity or all these things that I don't understand how they work. But just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And we are feeling, I don't know if it's the earth's, if it's the earth crying, or if we're certainly feeling our fellow human beings and maybe our fellow sentient beings and non-sentient beings. I mean, everything is being affected. The ocean's being affected. The birds are being affected. The bees are being affected. The worms, the plants, the trees, it's all being affected. So you would say, hold space for people to rage
and grieve
and grieve
and cry and moan and express their pain and their sadness.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. The rage is in there as well. And we tend to be very reluctant to honor rage. And rage is part of grieving. But the other aspects, the more traditional, crying, sadness, pain, loss,
Right. So how are taking action and healing interrelated? That's what I was shown in a meditation, is that we are standing at a crossroads between hope and despair. And when I was shown that, that's when I took my 6-week sabbatical. I was like, I'm out for a while. I need to just process this. What I get is there is really no hope unless you're taking action.
I believe it helps so much. Andrew Harvey, in his book, Sacred Hope, that's his famous line: look for what breaks your heart and give your energy to that. And now we are in a world where if we're halfway conscious, we look around and virtually everything breaks our heart. So
right.
We find something and we take action. There's a book, I don't have it right in front of me, Nature's Best Hope. I can't remember the author, but it was a New York Times bestseller. And he said, working in our yards and doing permaculture and creating sanctuary for wildlife in our yards, that we could, that would have this extraordinary benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So something like that,
Mm-hmm.
Our yards are a place to start. Yeah,
they are. I was so happy. My next door neighbor came over the other day, and I've converted. Well, during COVID, I mean, my yard is now a garden, and I have so many vegetables that everybody that comes by, I'm just giving them stuff. It's crazy how much stuff is it's producing, and I only have a 10,000 square foot lot, and maybe 25 of it is vegetable garden right now. But I converted my lawn to clover, and my next door neighbor came over the other day, and she said, you know what? I really like that. And she said, I really want to help the pollinators. Where did you get your clover? I'm going to do that this fall. And I just felt like one more person that is taking action to do what we can do.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll have to look for the book. Tell me the name of the book again.
Nature's Best Hope.
Yeah. Growing a garden has definitely been my salvation during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I get out and ground every morning. Very, very first thing when I get up, I go out and stand on my bare feet and just feel the ions, just feel nature. And it helps. But more of us doing that, we can only all do what we can do. It feels like the problem is so big that people are frozen, that fight or flight or freeze. Everybody's like, what do I do now? And then the grief comes in, and that kind of knocks you to your knees. But somehow I think we need to name that. We need to name that we're grieving and honor it so that we can begin to heal.
One of my friends told me that it was a webinar she was on, that we need to treat one another as if we are all in hospice.
Wow. Yeah, I can feel that. I think about, so your practice is, I'm assuming adults. Do you have children as well?
No, just adults. Yeah.
I wonder for the kids what they're experiencing, because it seems like they've come in much more sensitized than we've lived long enough that we've had, a lot of the sensitivity learned out of us. I don't know if that's the right word, but the kids must be really scared and aching and angry. And
I want to share a story with you about my granddaughter. This was when she was about probably about five or six. And she's going to be 15 in October.
Okay.
And she was such a sensitive child. She's wounded in a lot of ways. But my son was working out in the yard, and there was a rose bush that he thought, it's old, and he was digging it out. And he looked over, and Livy was hanging her head and sobbing. And he went over and said, "What's wrong, honey?" And she said, through her gulps and her tears, "That was my favorite rose bush." She had a relationship with that rose bush. And for her, it was like a death to see this rose bush taken out.
I got to tell you that there are 3 birds that have one of them is clinging to the screen right now as we're talking.
I'm looking forward to the call that we do with Linda Bender, because Linda Bender is an animal communicator, and she listens through the animals. And there's so much that we're just not cognizant of, how they are able to tune into us and how, we can tune into them.
I know you have Dexter. I have Gidget. The dogs are so sensitive to any kind of energy that you put out there. I mean, I know if I'm upset about something, she'll come over and just crawl right in my lap. How does she know that? She can feel it. I agree. For our listeners, Pat and I are working on a panel for the Parliament of World Religions, where we're going to be talking about being boots on the ground for Mother Earth. And Linda Bender, going to be one of the panelists with us, Dr. Linda Bender, as well as Claire Dubois, who speaks for the trees, and Shannon Thompson, who speaks for wounded women. So it should be a fascinating panel.
I want to add one thing if we still have time.
Sure.
Again, I need to learn more about this, but there's, again, another book. I think it's Jude Caravan's. She's got quantum hope, and she talks about a concept called flickering. And what that is that when a species is on the edge of extinction, there's like a quantum leap, and they can move into like another level, another vibration, a new way of being, really.
So a level of consciousness, maybe.
I would say that. I'm thinking about Rupert Sheldrake and the morphic field.
It's interesting because I'm reading Power versus.
Exactly. Yeah, the reason I brought it up is that it is crucial that we have hope. And what I said about hospice and some of these other things, despair is here. I mean, we have despair, but the hope is important. And one of the things that I'm learning, this was Andrew Harvey and Robert Thurman, a YouTube recently, the importance of connecting with joy. We must also connect with joy. We must. That's an important part of it. And let me see if I can just find this. I wrote this down yesterday. It's time that we took joy seriously. Because, and you can think about this with power versus force. Joy is a very, very high vibration.
Yeah.
So we bring the vibration up. And Robert Thurman, he's 80 years old, and he's been very closely aligned with the Dalai Lama for decades. And they spoke about, Andrew and Robert, about the embodiment of joy that the Dalai Lama is. Anybody that's had any contact with him, the playful joyfulness is the essence of his energy field. So that's an important piece, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting, again, because I'm reading Power versus Force. The grieving and the fear and the shame and all that vibrate so low that they consider it in the negative. 200 is where it starts becoming positive, and that's courage. And then above that is willingness, and it goes higher and higher. I think joy is like 500 or something, 500 or 600. It's pretty high. And so the idea that what you're saying is really interesting to me, that as the last gasp of a species that's going extinct, because we are going extinct. I mean, that's basically what the IPCC said. It's just a matter of time unless we get our SHIT together, but our best hope may be raising consciousness.
Absolutely, yes. But that's not boots on the ground.
Well,
I think both. I think it's both.
Well, it is boots on the ground in that if you are spreading light and love as opposed to anger and I had someone tell me a story the other day that they were somewhere and this person just went off on them. And instead of reacting, they just were calm, which did serve to ignite the other person a little bit, make them spiral up. But she said, I could not in good conscience engage in that. I had to keep my energy calm and loving.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think with all this warring, we're warring with each other. Our species is going extinct and we're warring with each other.
Right.
So if those of us who are aware enough can maintain our equilibrium,
yes,
then I think that is part of boots on the ground.
I hear you. And it reminds me of a little story that I heard recently about a monk that was still in Tibet, but was talking to the Dalai Lama. And this monk said something about, I almost failed or something. He said, I lost my capacity to love while he was being tortured. And that's quite a trick. But that I think is what you're talking about. And what we need to do is maintain that love for one another, no matter what happens. And boy, that's a heck of a assignment.
That's the inspiration by somebody like Mandela, like how he was jailed for all those years and yet he still came out and still had love. Gandhi, Christ on the cross, any of the great inspirational figures were able to maintain love and compassion for the people that were their attackers.
That's right. Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And isn't that the message? Isn't that the message of all the great spiritual teachers?
Love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking about Jesus and Buddha, that's the bottom line.
So all of that, I think, is how do we talk about our collective grief? I think we talk about maintaining our life force, maintaining our joy, enjoying every moment that we have.
Absolutely. And being there for one another.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Pretty heavy topic. Well, thank you. Now I have a whole list of books to look at, which is always the thing. We always close with a 3-point process. We always share some good news. Do you have any good news of anything that's happened on the climate front?
On the climate front, good news. Well, I think what I want to say is that we're having this conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that, and I know that's your intention with your podcast is people talking about climate change. And it's such a valuable thing because it's the denial and the distraction that it makes things so much worse.
Exactly.
And prevents people from taking action. So yeah, that we're having this conversation, that is definitely good news on the climate front.
Yeah. When Christina and I started this podcast, it was 2 years ago, and she'd been doing work, for many years before that. We started with the goal of just calling out the elephant in the room. And fortunately or unfortunately, with everything that's transpired this summer with weird, wild weather events and last week's IPCC report, we're here. I mean, I really can't have a conversation with someone where it doesn't come up. And so as hard and heartbreaking as that is, that was our goal. So we're there. We did that much.
Well, yeah.
So next is an action step, something that our listeners can do. And around grief, I think,
Around grief, I'd say acknowledge it within yourself and talk about it. Initiate conversations about it.
About how you're feeling with.
Yeah, talk about the grief. Share the grief. Almost like when they have support groups for people who've had loved ones that died, because the talking about it helps and people support one another. So I would say initiate conversations and support one another in the acknowledgement of it. I mean, it has to be global grief. I mean, how can you not? Even no matter how unconscious you are, it's still real. You can't. It doesn't make it not real because you deny it.
Right. Yeah. I don't know how anybody cannot be feeling it right now. It's just, it seems so intense.
Right.
It seems so intense.
Right.
All right. Then our third step is a sanity tip. So when you get in a sense of overwhelm, because which I'm sure you must, listening to all of your clients, what do you do to stay sane?
Do you know what I do? And you and I have had some experience with this in some. I remember a particular phone call that we had. I go outside, and I very consciously connect with everything in the natural world around me. And sometimes I do the Ho'oponopono prayer. Other times I just connect. I love you. I love you. You're so beautiful. I very consciously open up. It's like I open up my heart wide open to the natural world. And I am in awe of the sky, and I'm in awe of the trees, and I'm in awe of the flowers. And I plug into the sense of awe in my moving my body through, where I live, on the sidewalk, around and of course in the woods. So connecting with the natural world as if, which it is, a real living entity, energy. Of course it is. So I acknowledge and love it and really feel the reciprocity of that.
Yeah. So I just got a really nice download right now. Just, maybe, so one of the other things that Christine and I talked about when we first started the podcast was maybe climate change was happening for us and not just to us. And maybe if we can look at, a silver lining, I do have a little bit of Pollyanna in me, that we are now able to recognize that every other being has as much of a right to be here, including the hornet's nest, and that humanity's dominion over is certainly misplaced, and that we should be giving gratitude for everything that's around us, for nature's reciprocity. We're the ones who don't reciprocate. Nature's totally giving it to us all the time.
And I got an interesting little thing that just popped up, and the beauty, focusing on the beauty, honoring the beauty, being in awe of the beauty, that raises our vibrations so much. Beholding the beauty is the piece. Yeah.
Nice. Nice. Thank you for your time. And thank you to our listeners for listening. That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me.